Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the heavy wool door hanging and stepping inside one of the most quietly brutal, genuinely freezing, and surprisingly well-organized survival systems in human history. An actual Norse winter, lived from the inside. Not the axe-throwing, horn-helmeted, dramatically backlit version. Not that. The real one, the one where the cow is your roommate, the smoke never fully leaves your lungs, and the word for starving to death is so old it became the English word starve. If you enjoy this kind of calm, matter-of-fact slide into the historically grim, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to mildly disturbing, deeply factual history. A huge thank you to one of you for suggesting this one. I hope you're already warm, because the people we're about to visit very much were not. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And honestly, tell me the coldest you've ever been, because I have a feeling tonight's going to recalibrate that number significantly. Dim the lights, turn on a fan for some soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe tuck your feet in, not because anything is coming to get them, but because after tonight, cold feet are going to feel like a personal failure. Have you ever wondered what it actually smelled like to sleep in a house shared with 12 people and 4 cows? Why did the Norse choose to build homes with no chimneys in some of the coldest latitudes on Earth, during an era with no insulation and no central heating? Could you survive a full working day in shoes that soaked through in the first 30 seconds? What exactly happens to a fisherman who goes overboard in 3 degrees Celsius water wearing wool and didn't know how to swim? Did anyone eat anything that wasn't fermented, dried, or both? The pine needles, was that a snack or a medical decision? And what does it mean that the worst legal punishment wasn't death? It was simply being left outside in January. Congratulations, you just woke up in a Norse longhouse somewhere in coastal Norway, around 950 CE. It's dark. It's smoky. Something warm and large is breathing at the other end of the building. And that's actually the good news. Good luck. You wake up in the dark. The fire pit at the center of the hall is still glowing, but you are not at the center of the hall. You are at the far end, on a raised wooden platform under a wool blanket that is heavier than it is warm. The air against your face is somewhere just above freezing. Your breath is visible. Somewhere nearby a child is also awake and is choosing not to mention it. You will get up in a moment. Not yet. The longhouse around you is somewhere between 15 and 75 meters long, depending on how well your family's last 3 harvests went. The walls are timber, or turf, or some combination of both that made sense in autumn and is making considerably less sense now. There's no chimney. There's never been a chimney. Smoke from the central fire pit drifts upward and pools under the roof until it finds the small hole left for it, which it does eventually, at its own pace, on its own schedule. The walls and the ceiling beams are black. They've been black for decades. The soot isn't recent. It's architectural. The smell hits you the way it always does when you first surface from sleep. Smoke, yes. Wet wool. Peat burning. Unwashed bodies including your own. And underneath all of that, something sharper. Ammonia. That's the animals. At the far end of the hall, your end, a low wooden partition, separates your sleeping platform from the winter quarters of the cattle, sheep, goats and pigs. They're not here by accident. They're here because their body heat is a deliberate part of the engineering. The longhouse is, functionally, a 2-species insulation system. The animals contribute warmth. You contribute the decision to live like this. The partition has opinions about how much it actually separates anything. A small lamp is burning on the post nearest the fire. It's a shallow stone dish filled with fish oil, with a wick of moss or twisted fibre, and it produces less light than you'd want, and more smell than you'd expect. The flame leans slightly toward you when you move, the way a dog leans toward a person it has already decided about. It does not pretend to be decorative. It pretends nothing. The temperature near the fire, on the best night, might reach 10 degrees. Where you are, it's lower than that. You know this. You've always known this. There's a child at the far end of the far end who is currently the coldest person in the building and has accepted this as their permanent social position. You sit up. The blanket is dense and lanolin heavy and releases you reluctantly, the way good blankets do. Your feet find the wooden platform. The floor below is packed earth. You don't put your feet on the floor yet. Nobody puts their feet on the floor until they absolutely have to. That's one of the small daily negotiations you make with the season. Somewhere across the hall, your Aunt Sigrun is already moving. Her hair is covered. Her sleeves are already rolled, and she is crouching near the fire with a piece of dried peat in each hand, coaxing the coals back into something cooperative. She doesn't look up. She was awake before the fire needed her, which means she was awake before you, which means she's been awake for a while already, doing the invisible arithmetic of keeping everyone alive. Sigrun is 60. Sigrun has done this every morning for 52 of those years. Sigrun is not going to be impressed by your decision to also be awake. The longhouse in December is approximately 6 hours from natural light. Not good light. Not warm light. Grey light. The kind that arrives like an apology and leaves before dinner. You won't see the sun directly for weeks. Above the Arctic Circle, you won't see it at all until late January. What you have is this lamp, this fire, this smell, and the steady sound of an animal shifting its weight on the other side of the partition. You put your feet on the floor, you are responsible for the fire. Not personally, the household has a rotation, but today the rotation has landed on you, which means the next several hours are about feeding small pieces of wood and dried dung to a long pit running down the middle of the hall. The fire cannot go out. If the fire goes out, the longhouse cools to outside temperature within an hour, and getting it back to a workable warmth takes most of a day. Everyone has opinions about how you tend it. The fire pit is maybe a metre wide and runs several metres down the centre of the hall. There's no grate, no andirons. The fuel sits directly on compressed earth, which is also the floor, which is also where the dog sleeps, which is also where the children play. The hearth doesn't have a name, but it has a personality. It accepts offerings unevenly. Too much dung at once, and it smoulders. Too little wood, and the temperature drop is immediate, personal, and noticed by everyone currently sitting at the edges of its radius. The smoke goes up. In theory, it exits through a hole in the roof. In practice, it performs a slow tour of the interior first, drifting past the sleeping platforms, settling briefly over the grain stores, visiting the livestock end of the hall, and depositing a thin layer of itself on every surface before reluctantly finding the hole. The walls are black. The roof timbers are black. Your hair, after 2 weeks of this, is also effectively black. Every longhouse in Norway smells like the inside of a fireplace, which is the smell of home, which is the smell of survival, which is fine. It's fine. The smell is just permanently there. The warmth math is simple, not comfort. Warmth. The fire running at full capacity keeps the air near the centre of the hall at somewhere around 10 degrees Celsius. That's roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Your refrigerator, assuming you have one in whatever century you're normally living in, keeps things at about 4 degrees Celsius. So the warmest part of your home is only about 6 degrees warmer than the average modern deli drawer. You're not cold. You're just not warm either. You're operating in the space between those two things for the next 4 to 5 months. At the far ends of the hall, the sleeping platforms approach freezing overnight. You know this because you've woken up there. The wool blankets help. The person sleeping next to you helps more. The 3 sheep on the other side of the low wooden partition are also contributing, not symbolically, but thermally. A sheep produces roughly 100 watts of continuous body heat. The 6 sheep and 2 cows at the livestock end of the hall are doing more structural work than the architecture. The animals don't know this. They don't care. They're just warm and present, which is enough. The smell from that end of the hall is ammonia. It's always ammonia. The urine and dung can't go anywhere until someone takes it outside, which happens on a schedule, which is not your schedule today. Today your schedule is the fire. The ammonia coexists with the smoke and the wet wool and the smell of skyr fermenting in a barrel near the wall. The barrel that hasn't been properly opened since October and has opinions about that. And the result is an interior atmosphere that's less air quality and more a lived-in collaboration of odours with established territories. Your grandfather Snorri coughs at the far sleeping platform without waking up. It's the deep cough of someone who's spent 48 winters in a longhouse, which is basically every adult here who's made it past 40. The smoke does that. Not this winter's smoke, the accumulated smoke of decades, absorbed into the throat in nightly instalments. Snorri's eyes have the matching feature. Red rims, constant watering, the slow narrowing of useful vision that's settled in around his 35th winter. He hasn't seen the far end of the hall clearly in 8 years. He hasn't mentioned it. You add another piece of dry dung to the fire. The fire accepts it, not enthusiastically, but it accepts it, which is enough, which is all you're asking for, which is the whole job. You share the building with a cow. Also 2 more cows, several sheep, 3 goats, and a pig that has started to recognize your voice. They live at one end of the longhouse, separated from your sleeping platform by a low partition that is structural in name only. The arrangement is not sentimental. The animals are there because they radiate body heat, and body heat is part of the household's heating plan, alongside the fire and the wool. You are doing the same job as the cow. The partition itself is wood, low enough that a goat can look over it if she's motivated, which she often is. It doesn't seal anything. What it does is establish a conceptual boundary between the side of the building where you sleep and the side where the animals sleep, a distinction that the smell does not particularly honour. Ammonia from urine and dung drifts freely across the architectural suggestion of a wall. The animals are warm. The wall is symbolic. Both of these things are true at the same time. The livestock aren't guests. They're infrastructure. Through November, December, January, and into February, every animal penned in that hall is contributing a measurable thermal output that your household has factored into its survival arithmetic. A cow, in a closed space, produces something in the range of a very dedicated wood stove. Multiply that by 3 and add the sheep, who cluster together with the quiet industrial efficiency of a wool blanket that occasionally walks around and makes noise. The pig doesn't contribute much thermally and has a personality that makes him difficult to overlook. He knows your voice because you're the one who feeds him. He'll know your voice until Blotmanother, sacrifice month, late October, early November, at which point he becomes the most significant fresh meat your household will see for the next 4 months. This transition is emotionally uncomplicated for the pig because he doesn't know about it. It is slightly more complicated for the children. Let's talk about the smell. It's not the smell. It's several smells arriving together in a formation they've clearly rehearsed. Wet wool has its own lane. Dung has its own lane. Smoke finds the gaps between the other smells and fills them. Unwashed human beings add a warm, close bottom note that no one in the building notices because everyone in the building is contributing to it. You've been living inside this combination since October. Your nose has made a unilateral decision to accept it. Visitors, if you had visitors, would notice immediately. You've lost the ability to use this information. The cattle need tending even in winter. Feed has been stored since summer hay, dried fodder, carefully rationed across the months. A thrall handles most of the mucking out, which is the word used for the daily reality of removing animal waste from the living space you share with the animals. The waste doesn't pause because it's cold outside. Neither does the work. A thrall who moves slowly gets reminded about it. The reminder isn't subtle. The animals are also a source of dairy through the winter months, though less than in summer. Sky, thick, fermented, stored in wooden barrels that haven't been opened since October, sits at the cooler end of the hall and lasts for months. The barrel smells like itself and everything else, which at this point is the same smell. You eat it because it's there, and because the alternative is the dried fish, and you had the dried fish yesterday. By February, the fodder is running low, and the animals are thinner than they were in November. You can see it in the way the cow stands. You're thinner too, though you're not keeping track. Everyone in the hall is running on the same calculation. Make it to spring, when the animals can graze again and the dairy increases, and the world stops being something you're surviving. The partition between you and the livestock holds its position. It doesn't keep out the cold, or the smell, or the sound of animals settling into sleep. What it does is remind everyone which side is which. On cold nights, when the fire has died down and the far end of the hall drops toward freezing, the cattle side is the warmer one. You know this. You've slept near the partition before. The cow has never commented on it. You put on your shoes. Each shoe is a single piece of untanned leather, gathered with a drawstring at the ankle, stitched at the heel, and shaped to your foot only by repeated wear. They are the same shoes you wore yesterday. They are the same shoes you will wear tomorrow. There is no waterproof layer, because the concept of a waterproof layer has not been invented yet. You will be standing in snow within 10 minutes. Podor, Chatoiles Thahirai Dudes That. The leather knows. The technical name is turn shoe. The turning refers to the construction method. The shoe is stitched inside out, then flipped, which presses the seam inward against your foot rather than outward where it would catch on things. It's clever engineering. Genuinely. The leather still smells faintly of the cow it used to be. That detail doesn't help. The slush gets in immediately, not gradually, not eventually, immediately, the way a paper towel meets a spill. Your foot is wet before you've cleared the farmstead gate. The rest of your day happens inside that fact. You don't think about it after the first hour, because there's nothing to do about it, and plenty of other things to think about, like the firewood that needs splitting before mid-morning, and the fishing lines that froze last night, and the thrall who's moving too slowly near the sheep pen. Your toes are cold. They've been cold since October. Below the shoe, your leg wrappings start. Strips of coarse wool wound from ankle to knee in a deliberate crossing pattern, like a compression bandage from a civilization that doesn't have compression bandages. They do help, somewhat. They hold the cold at a slight distance from your shin. They also absorb moisture and stay damp for most of the day, which is the wool's primary opinion about winter. Wool works wet. It just works less well than it works dry, and it smells considerably more. Your outer cloak has been treated with lanolin, which is the fat from unwashed wool, and it sheds light rain tolerably. Light rain, not sleet, not the horizontal ice pellet situation that comes in off the fjord when the wind is doing what the wind does every second week of February. In that scenario, the cloak becomes decorative. You pull it tighter anyway, because the gesture feels purposeful even when the garment has already lost the argument. Fingertip feeling goes early. Not gone, just reduced to something you'd describe as consulting rather than direct knowledge. You can grip the axe handle. Whether you're gripping it well is a separate question the axe doesn't answer until you've already swung. The comparison that lands here probably is that your entire cold weather outfit performs roughly at the level of a reusable grocery bag in a rainstorm. You know, it's not enough. You wear it anyway because it's what there is, and because standing still isn't a strategy that survives contact with January. A woman 2 longhouses over, named Ragnhildra, wraps her children's feet in rabbit fur before the turn shoes go on. Ragnhilda has 6 children, 4 of whom are still alive, and she does this for all 4 every morning without saying anything about it. The children's shoes are wet within 20 minutes instead of 10. This is considered a meaningful improvement. She's not wrong. A doubled layer between the leather and the skin buys you something. It buys you a wet fur lining instead of direct wet leather, which is the kind of marginal gain that passes for winter innovation in the 9th century. Not Gore-Tex, not Thinsulate, not anything with a brand behind it. Just dead rabbit, deployed early. By midday your feet have moved from wet to numb to something you've stopped describing as a sensation and started describing as a weather condition. You're aware of them the way you're aware of the sky, broadly, distantly, as context rather than complaint. They'll hurt again tonight when you come back inside and get close to the fire. That part is reliable. The feeling always returns at the fire. You set the axe down, you pick up the fishing line. The leather is stiff now, not from drying out, but from the cold working into the untanned hide and making it rigid and slightly thicker than it was this morning, the way a frozen rope forgets it was ever meant to bend. The shoe is not cooperating with your foot anymore. You're working around each other. You dress in layers. The base is a linen undergarment, slightly damp from sleep. Over that goes a long woolen tunic, then a second woolen tunic, then leg wrappings, strips of cloth wound from ankle to knee, secured with small bone hooks, then the cloak, then the hood. The dressing takes longer than breakfast. None of these layers are clean in any sense you would currently recognize. You will not undress again until the bath next Saturday. The wool comes from your own sheep, not the soft merino blend situation on a Patagonia tag, the rough, lanolin heavy fleece of a Norse breed that spent the summer grazing on hillsides and the winter standing 6 feet from your bed. The women of the household carded it, spun it, wove it, and sewed it, which together represents more labour hours than the garment will ever receive in gratitude. The tunic fits the way things fit when one person made every piece of it by memory and by hand. Mostly correct, slightly not. The leg wrappings are their own project. You wind each strip from the ankle upward, overlapping, pulling tight enough to hold and loose enough not to stop circulation. A bone hook at the knee pins the end down. The technique takes practice. On bad mornings the strips refuse to cooperate, which is to say that on bad mornings you are having a small argument with a piece of cloth before the sun has risen, which it hasn't done yet anyway, because it won't rise for another 2 hours, and when it does it will last until mid-afternoon, and then leave again. The cloak goes on last. Its fulled wool, the fibres beaten and compressed until they lock together, which repels light rain for a credible amount of time before it stops repelling anything. Some households treat the wool with lanolin from the same sheep the wool came from, which is a closed-loop system your ancestors would have called practical, and a modern skincare brand would put on a small batch label. It does not make the cloak waterproof. It makes the cloak waterproof for roughly 20 minutes. The hood is a separate piece, pulled over the head and down over the shoulders. It doesn't seal anywhere. Wind enters from the front. On genuinely cold days, and today is one, the exposed part of your face goes numb first, then forgets what temperature is, then simply exists as a surface. Your ears are inside the hood. That's the whole strategy. Ears in, everything else managed. The cloak pin at your shoulder is iron. It's cold in the same committed way that iron is always cold in winter, briefly painful to the touch, warming slowly against your body for the first 10 minutes of wearing, and then staying warm until you take it off again, and it immediately forgets. The pin holds everything closed. If the pin fails, and pins fail, the cloak opens and the system fails with it. By the time you step outside, you're carrying roughly 3 kilograms of damp wool on your body. The smell is wool and smoke and sleep. Not terrible, not good, just a full record of the last several days expressed as clothing. The Saturday bath is 6 days away. The wool is aware of this. You both know exactly how this week is going to go. You eat breakfast. Breakfast is a wooden bowl of sky, strained fermented dairy, white, slightly tangy, slightly thick, drawn from a barrel in the storage room that has not been opened since October. There is butter on top. There is sometimes a flatbread to dip. There is no fruit. There is no bread alternative. There is no second option if you do not feel like skyer today. The barrel will be your breakfast every morning until the barrel is empty. The barrel is large. The skyer has been in there for 2 months. It's fine. It was designed for this. The fermentation process is essentially a preservation agreement the dairy made with itself before you were born, and it's been holding up its end reliably since the age of settlement. You scoop from the top. The top is good. You do not investigate further. The flatbread is barley. It's always barley. Barley is what you grew, barley is what you ground, and barley is what you'll be chewing through for the next 4 months with a set of back teeth already worn flat from doing exactly this every day for 20 winters. A tooth ground flat by 20 years of barley flatbread doesn't hurt. It just informs you, quietly every meal, that the years are adding up. The bread is dense and a little smoky from the hearth it was cooked on. Everything is a little smoky from the hearth it was cooked on. There's no coffee. There's whey, the pale liquid left over from straining the skyre, which is thin and slightly sour and serves the same psychological function as coffee, without the caffeine, the warmth, or any of the reasons people drink coffee. You drink it anyway. It has vitamin content. You don't know that. You drink it because it's there and winter is long, and the barrel of whey is also large. This is basically a Whole Foods breakfast, which is a strange thing to say about a Viking, but skyr is genuinely on the shelf at Whole Foods right now, priced at $4 a cup, marketed as an ancient protein source. In 1010C, your version came out of an unlabeled wooden barrel and cost you a summer of dairy work. The ingredients are identical. The branding has improved. Meat is not on the table. Meat was on the table in late October, during Blopanutha, sacrifice month, when the animals too old or too numerous to feed through winter were slaughtered, salted, and smoked. That was the one window in the year when most Norse households ate fresh meat in quantity. You ate well for roughly 2 weeks. Then the meat went into storage and became a ration you cut from, carefully, because it has to reach April, and April is not close. Your grandmother Sjöodisk tears a piece of flatbread at the far end of the hall, dips it into her bowl, and stares at the fire without expression. She's been doing this since October. Shall be doing it in March. Thordis has been doing it since 952 CA, which she remembers, and through 3 different husbands, which she does not discuss. The barrel does not get smaller as fast as you'd like. The dried cod is also available. Stockfish, wind-dried without salt, hard as a plank, reconstituted in water and chewed into something resembling food, has been a backup option since before your grandfather's time. It keeps for years. Literal years. Stockfish found in a storage pit doesn't spoil. It waits. It has patience. It has more patience than you do by February. You finish the bowl. You set it on the bench. Someone will rinse it with water, and it'll be used again at the next meal, because washing each dish separately is not the winter priority it becomes in a warmer century. The bowl is fine. The bowl has seen worse. You walk to fetch water. The stream is roughly 200 meters from the longhouse, frozen on top, moving underneath, accessible through a hole that has to be rebroken every morning with the back of an axe. The buckets are wooden and rope-handled. The path is icy in some places and slush in others, and your turn shoes have already given up. Your hands lose feeling about halfway. By the time you walk back, the water has begun to skin over with new ice. The turn shoes don't owe you anything. They're a single piece of untanned leather gathered at the ankle with a drawstring, which is a construction philosophy that works well in dry summers and fails completely in December. The leather still smells faintly of the cow it used to be. Within about 30 seconds of contact with slush, the distinction between your shoe and the wet ground becomes academic. You wear wet feet the way you wear your clothes, all day, every day, until the season ends, or something goes wrong with your toes. The axe lives next to the water hole. Not your axe specifically, just an axe. It belongs to whoever gets there first, which in winter is whoever is most desperate, which is usually you. You chop, you crouch, you fill the bucket, and you try not to touch the water with your bare hands, because the stream is running at roughly the same temperature as the inside of your ambitions. Cold, deeply cold, the kind of cold that doesn't feel like cold at first. It feels like pressure, and then it feels like nothing, and the nothing is the part you should worry about. This is where the water ends up, in the iron pot over the central fire, eventually warm enough for porridge or skyr or washing something that actually needed washing 2 weeks ago. The fire is always burning. Someone's job is to make sure the fire is always burning. If the fire goes out, the longhouse drops to the temperature of a moderately ambitious root cellar, a temperature where a cold draught becomes a person, sitting down at the bench beside you, looking at the fire pit with the slow disappointment of a relative who expected better. The goats are fine, by the way. The goats have never been cold. The goats sleep in a pile and radiate heat with the confidence of something that's never paid rent. You are separated from them by a low wooden partition that does not block sound, smell, or their opinion of you. The partition is less a wall and more a suggestion. A goat suggestion. Outside, it's roughly -8. Above the Arctic Circle right now, the sun hasn't appeared in 6 weeks and won't for another 4. Even in southern Norway, December gives you about 5 hours of grey light on a good day, which is basically the lighting in a dentist's waiting room, except the waiting room is a frozen fjord and the dentist doesn't exist yet. You do all of this in the dark. You carry water in the dark. You break ice in the dark. You walk back through slush you can't see with buckets that are already starting to freeze on the outside. The water arrives. You set the buckets down near the fire. Your hands begin the slow return to sensation, which is less a relief and more an extended complaint. The knuckles ache. The fingers tingle. Your sister Hilde, working the upright loom against the wall, doesn't look up. She's been watching you walk back and forth every morning since October and has formed a complete opinion. Hilda does not share it. Hilda never shares it. Hilda once shared an opinion in 1003 CE, and it didn't go the way she wanted, and the household has been quieter since. The bucket drips onto the dirt floor. The floor absorbs it without comment. You'll do this again tomorrow. You count the meat. The household keeps the autumn slaughter, beef, mutton, pork, hung in strips and slabs in the smoke of the fire pit and stored in the rafters. Every household has a number. The number tells you, roughly, how many days into the winter the household can keep eating meat before it has to switch fully to sky, butter, and dried fish. The number is never as high as you would like. The number is recalculated quietly every week. Blot Manuv, the slaughter month, was the one time of year when the household smelled like a real meal. Late October, early November, every animal that wasn't going to survive the winter on the feed you had was killed, processed, and preserved, salted, smoked, stored in barrels that had not been opened since October and would not be opened cheerfully. The work was enormous, and the result was still not enough. It was never enough. The meat in the rafters doesn't last forever. Smoke preserves it from rot, mostly. Cold slows the process, but by mid-January the strips are thinning and the household is doing arithmetic that nobody wants to do out loud. You count the slabs, you count the mouths. You count the weeks until the ice breaks and the fishing improves. The number you get is not a comfortable number. Skyor fills the gap. It's fermented, thick, slightly sour, stored in wooden barrels, and it could remain edible for months if the barrel stayed cold and sealed and nobody did anything unfortunate to it. It's the original chobani, except there's no label, no refrigeration, and eating it isn't a lifestyle choice. It's the plan. Butter, whey, dried fish and skyer. That's February, that's March, that's every morning until the ground thaws. The dried fish is stockfish, scry wind-dried cod from the Lofoten Islands. No salt needed, just cold air and time. A piece of stockfish done right could last years. It was hard as a board when you pulled it from storage. You soaked it, beat it, soaked it again. The texture did not improve dramatically, but it had protein and it kept you upright. And in March those were the only qualities that mattered. A thrall named Bridget, captured in a raid on Galway when she was 11, working in this longhouse for the last 9 years, carries a slab of stockfish past the fire. She drops it in the pot without ceremony. The pot doesn't react. The stockfish doesn't react. The household eats. Bridget eats last. The real fear isn't any single week. It's the hungersvetter, the hunger winter, the famine year. A bad harvest. A brutal October storm before the slaughter was finished. An illness moving through the animals in August. The household keeps the count quietly, in nobody's specific head, in everybody's general one. By February the count starts to feel real. By March the count is the only conversation that matters, even though nobody is having it out loud. The meat in the rafters is still there. The number is still being recalculated. Bridget, who can do the arithmetic faster than anyone else in the household and has never once been asked to, watches the rafters when she walks past them. You make flatbread, barley flour, water, a little salt if there is any, mixed in a wooden bowl with your hands. You flatten the dough between your palms, slap it onto a flat stone heated at the edge of the fire, and watch it cook in less than a minute on each side. The bread is dense, slightly gritty, and smells faintly of whatever was last cooked on the stone. There is no oven. There is no rise. There is no Tuesday loaf. There is just today's flatbread, and tomorrow's. The barley comes from the summer harvest, ground with a hand quern, 2 heavy circular stones, one sitting on the other, rotated by your arms until the grain becomes flour. It takes time. Your shoulders know this. By February, the flour has been sitting in a sack since September, and it has opinions about this. Small ones, gritty ones. The flatbread you make in January isn't quite the flatbread you made in October. It's denser, slightly darker. The stone doesn't mind. The bread does something else, slowly, over years. Barley flatbread ground on stone contains small fragments of stone. Not intentionally, not as an ingredient, just as a consequence of the grinding process that nobody has found a clean way around. You eat those fragments across 20 winters, and your teeth respond accordingly. Skeletal remains from this period show molars ground flat and smooth, not from age, but from the bread. A tooth ground flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread is basically a millstone that went the wrong way. The rest of the meal assembles around the bread. Sky, scooped from a wooden barrel that hasn't been opened since October, is thick and sour and proteins you through another morning. Dried fish, pulled from the rafter bundles, is either chewed cold or dropped in water and boiled soft, depending on how cold your hands are and how ambitious you feel at dawn. Butter, if there's still butter, goes on the bread. Gon's on the bread. Whey, the liquid left from cheese making, gets drunk. Because throwing away calories in February is not a concept anyone has developed yet. This is where barley becomes, functionally, your entire personality. You eat it as flatbread. You ferment it into ale. You boil it into porridge. You feed the surplus to the livestock at the other end of the hall, who eat it and then breathe the smell back at you all night. Barley is less a food and more a relationship, long-term, slightly unpleasant, completely unavoidable. The ale deserves a sentence. It's weak by modern standards, less alcoholic than a Guinness at lunch, but it's safer than water from a source shared with the animals, which is most sources. You drink it at breakfast. Port. Chivod. Higher. The children drink it at breakfast. And this is not a problem anyone is identifying as a problem. Now, the flavour situation. Everything you eat in deep winter has been preserved by one of 3 methods: drying, fermenting, or salting. Nothing is fresh. Nothing is crisp. The sky is sour. The fish is either hard as wood or soft as resignation. The bread is the closest thing to a neutral experience, which is why you eat it at every meal, which is why your teeth look like that. A modern nutritionist reviewing your winter diet would have a lot of questions, starting with the scurvy risk and ending somewhere around the barrel of sky that's been fermenting since autumn, which is basically a Whole Foods kombucha section, except it's in your house and it smells like a barn. The fire underneath all of this burns peat or dried dung depending on what's available. A torch of dried fish oil hangs near the work area, burning with the smell of dinner, which is either comforting or deeply confusing, depending on how hungry you are. The smoke sits under the roof. The flatbread sits on the stone. You eat standing up, because sitting at a table is an evening activity, and mornings are for production. The stone is blackened on both sides from years of use. It doesn't belong to you. Exactly. It belonged to whoever built this hearth before you, and it'll belong to whoever builds the next fire after you're gone. It's the most reliable object in the building. It has never failed to be flat. You live in smoke. The fire pit runs the length of the hall, and the only way for smoke to leave the building is through a hole in the roof, which it does slowly and inefficiently. Most of the smoke stays. It settles in the rafters, blackens the walls, deposits soot on every surface, and works its way into your hair, your clothes, and your eyes. Your eyes water now without you noticing. You will spend a third of your life inside this smoke. The roof hole isn't a chimney. It's an aspiration. On calm days, the smoke pools horizontally across the upper half of the hall like a second ceiling, sitting at about head height if you're standing, which you mostly aren't. You sit, you crouch, you learn, without deciding to learn, that there's a band of slightly cleaner air roughly at bench level, and your body migrates to it the way a plant migrates toward a window. The walls haven't been white since the building went up. Nobody remembers what colour they were. The fire does two things. It keeps the hall from killing you, and it slowly blinds you. Eye disease from smoke exposure is common enough that archaeologists find it written in bone, orbital changes, inflammation markers, scarring consistent with chronic conjunctivitis and likely trachoma. By your 40s, if you make it there, your vision is probably compromised. Not gone, just steadily, quietly narrowing, the way a doorway shrinks if you never replace the frame. You don't notice the increments. You just notice, eventually, that you're holding things closer to your face. The temperature near the fire is manageable. The temperature at the far end of the hall, where the sleeping platforms are closest to the outer wall, approaches freezing by the small hours of the morning. 10 degrees Celsius is what you get on a good night near the flames. Less if the wind is coming off the fjord and the turf walls aren't enough. A lot of nights, the animals at the other end of the building are generating more usable heat than the fire. You registered this as a fact without finding it strange. The smell is layered. Peat smoke sits on top. Underneath that, dung and ammonia from the livestock end, which is a concept your nose has largely stopped processing because the alternative is thinking about it. Wet wool, rendered fat from the lamps, which burn fish oil and smell exactly like fish oil. The sky barrel near the far wall, open since last week. Your own clothes, which haven't been washed since the last Lager de Gore, which was Saturday, which is named for bathing, because the Norse decided an entire day of the week should carry that expectation. 1 day per week for everyone in the building. The lamps are small iron or soapstone dishes filled with fish oil or animal fat, with a wick of twisted moss or plant fibre. They produce a soft orange light that reaches about as far as your forearm, and then politely refuses to commit any further. You have several of them. The hall is still dim. Winter darkness above 60 degrees north lasts 18 hours, and the interior at midday looks like the lobby of a hotel that has stopped trying. Your cousin Astrid is at the loom. Astrid adjusts her lamp. She moves it an inch to the left. She moves it an inch back. The weaving doesn't pause. Astrid has been weaving the same wool tunic since November and will finish it sometime around the spring equinox, which is also when she will finish having opinions about how slowly the rest of you work. You check the sky. There is no sky to check. It is mid-December and the sun never quite rises. It gestures at the horizon for 2 hours of grey twilight and then withdraws. Above the Arctic Circle, the gesture does not happen at all for several weeks. The day's work begins anyway by oil lamp before the twilight and continues after it. You stop expecting the sun. The sun is not part of the plan from late November through late January. The oil lamp is doing its best. It's a shallow soapstone dish with a wick made of dried moss, burning fish oil or rendered animal fat, producing a flame roughly the size of a grape. It smells like the bottom of a fishing boat. Several of these lamps are positioned around the longhouse, and together they provide enough light to see your hands, your work, and the person sitting directly across from you. Everything beyond that is suggestion. This is where the indoor winter schedule takes over completely. There's no going outside unless there's a reason. The livestock need feeding, the wood needs splitting, the water hole needs breaking open again where it froze overnight. You do these things, and then you come back in and you sit down and you work. The work is the same every day. It doesn't end, it simply pauses. The women are doing one thing. The answer, all winter long, is spinning. A Norse household's survival through winter depends directly on textile production. Wool must be carded, spun into yarn, woven into cloth, and sewn into clothing and blankets before the existing ones disintegrate. The spindle whorl is the most archaeologically common small object found in Norse domestic sites, which is the material record's polite way of telling you that someone was spinning constantly, in every household, for months, every year, without interruption. It's basically the Netflix subscription of the Viking Age, except it's mandatory, takes all day, and produces socks. The men carve wood, bone, antler, tool handles, sledge runners, barrel staves, combs. A bone comb takes several hours and produces something the size of your palm. The work is fine and repetitive and done by lamplight, with fingers that are never quite warm enough. The comb has opinions about this. It doesn't hurry. Somewhere in the hall a child is being told a story. This is not optional entertainment. It's how information travels. The skalds who perform at a jarl's court are the prestige version, delivering elaborate compositions in strict metre with kennings layered inside kennings, which is basically a TED talk, except the talk is in riddles, the riddles rhyme, and forgetting a line gets you fired by a man with a sword. But in the ordinary longhouse, the storytelling is simpler. Genealogy, local history, what happened to furious uncle, why you don't go near that particular bog. The lamp flickers. Somebody adds a piece of peat to the fire. The story continues. 5 hours of grey light if you're in southern Scandinavia, 6 on a generous day. The quality of that light is the colour of old linen, flat, directionless, arriving horizontally through whatever gap exists between the turf wall and the roof. It's the kind of light that has clearly been demoted from a more glamorous posting and is no longer trying to impress anyone. It doesn't illuminate so much as confirm that the outdoors still exists. You step outside, squint, confirm it, and return. The dark has a physical weight by January, not metaphorical weight. Your body has been running on fish oil lamplight for 2 months. Your eyes are sore from smoke and close focus, and the cold outside is the kind that makes your face tighten as soon as you step through the door. The badstuffer, the steam bath hut, is Saturday's reward, which is why the Norse named Saturday Lagadagur, meaning bathing day, which is basically scheduling a spa appointment into the days of the week, and then keeping it for 5 centuries. You go, you sweat, you feel briefly human. You bring the lice with you because the lice are always with you, and they find the steam agreeable. The lamp needs more oil. You refill it from the small clay vessel near the fire. The flame steadies. The carving continues. The spindle turns. Outside, the sky is the colour it was 2 hours ago and will be for the next 2 months. You've stopped looking. You weave. The vertical loom stands against the wall, weighted at the bottom by stones tied to the warp threads, and the work is slow, repetitive, and physical. Wool is processed, spun on a drop spindle, dyed with plant material, and woven into the cloth that will become next year's tunics, blankets, sails, and trade goods. The loom is the household's other economy. You are expected to be at it for several hours a day, every day, all winter while the fire burns down and the children fall asleep against your knees. The wool starts as fleece. Fleece is greasy, matted, and smells exactly the way a wet sheep smells, which is to say it smells like the sheep end of your longhouse, which is 3 meters away. You card it, comb it, pull it apart until it's soft enough to spin. A drop spindle is a weighted stick. You draft the fibre, let it twist, wind the yarn onto the shaft, repeat. It's the kind of task that looks meditative from a distance and feels like a minor endurance event from the inside. The cloth you produce isn't decorative, it's structural. A Norse household that doesn't produce enough cloth, doesn't stay warm, doesn't go to sea, doesn't trade. Sails for longships were woven from wool, treated with fat and oil, dense enough to hold wind, and a single sail could require the fleece of several dozen sheep and hundreds of hours at the loom. Someone's mother wove the sail, possibly yours. Let's talk about the drop spindle. It's not a tool, it's a relationship. You carry it while you walk, while you talk, while you wait for anything at all, because the moment your hands are idle, the thread stops and the thread can't stop. Women in this house have been spinning since they could hold the shaft upright. Your daughter is already learning. She's 4, and her yarn is uneven, and she's proud of it, and you let her be proud because there are years ahead to correct it. The other work piles beside the loom. Clothing needs mending, shoes need patching, the turnshoe leather, already soaked from its last outing in the slush, still slightly damp, still faintly smelling of the cow it used to be. Socks and leg wrappings need restitching at the seams. Needles are bone or bronze, thin enough to break if you grip wrong. You don't grip wrong. You've been doing this since before you had an opinion about it. A thrall girl named Ethne sits nearby, carding wool with wide wooden paddles. Ethne doesn't look up. Ethne is 14 and was sold to this household last spring by a Dublin trader named Ulvir, which is information Ethne does not bring up. The paddles make a soft rhythmic scratch against the air, which is basically a white noise machine, except the white noise machine is a person, and the person belongs to the household the way the loom belongs to the household. Nobody comments on this. It's Tuesday. It's also basically every other day. The warp-weighted loom itself is a piece of engineering that hasn't changed in 1,000 years before you, and won't change for several centuries after. It works. The weights hang, the warp hangs taut, the shuttle passes through. You beat the weft down with a long, flat sword beater, a weaving sword, which is one of the few items in this house with the word sword in its name that you're actually allowed to use. The cloth builds upward, row by row, at a rate that makes your eyes tired to calculate. By midwinter you've produced several meters of undyed cloth, some dyed in yellow-brown from weld or onion skins, and a small amount of a bluish-grey from woad that came out slightly wrong. You don't throw it away. Nothing is thrown away. The slightly wrong loth becomes an underlayer, which becomes warm enough inside, enough other layers, that it doesn't matter what colour it is. Colour is for summer. Winter is for thickness. The fire has burned down again. The youngest child is fully asleep now, a full dead weight against your shin. The loom stands in the dim lamplight, warp threads hanging in straight grey lines, like something that's waiting patiently for you to come back to it. You will come back to it. Tomorrow, and the day after. The loom is not going anywhere. Neither are you. You listen. After the evening meal, when the bowls are stacked and the fire has settled, the household storyteller, the skald, in court contexts, but here, often a grandparent or visiting traveller, begins reciting verse. The verse is in old meters, with elaborate compound metaphors, and the recitation can last most of an hour. There is no other entertainment. There is no second programme. There is no skipping ahead. Tonight's poem is about a battle nobody in the room remembers, narrated as if everyone does. The skald doesn't read. There's nothing to read. The whole composition exists in one place, which is inside someone's head, and it's been there for years. Stanza after stanza, memorized and maintained the way you'd maintain a tool, checked, rehearsed, kept sharp. A court skald performing for a jarl could recite hundreds of lines of elaborate verse in a formal meter called drotkvad, where every stanza requires internal rhyme, half-rhyme, and alliteration all operating simultaneously, which is basically a TED Talk, except the talk is in riddles, the riddles rhyme. And forgetting one gets you fired by a man with a sword. The kennings are the thing. A kenning is a compound metaphor that replaces a plain noun. The sea is the whale road, blood is battle dew, a sword is the wound snake, a ship is the horse of the waves. These aren't decorations, they're the vocabulary. You don't say the sea, you say the whale road, and the image does more work than the word ever could. The oil lamp on the post throws a yellow circle of light across the nearest faces. Beyond that, there's just the dark and the smell of smoke and the voice. Everyone in the hall is doing something with their hands. Someone's mending a strap. Someone's working a piece of antler into a shape. The children are nominally sleeping, and very much not. The recitation moves over them all like weather, present, continuous, requiring nothing except that you stay. The listening is the point. Hituo osmal parois. Not comprehension. Not applause. The poem lands its punchline. A kenning so compressed, it takes a moment to unfold. A quiet beat follows. It was the original Netflix autoplay, except the algorithm is a 70-year-old man who watched 3 people die and wants to tell you about it. Stories were also practical objects. A skald who composed praise poetry for a jarl was buying something. Favour, hospitality, sometimes protection. A well-placed verse in the right hall could settle a grudge, or revive one. Skalds were occasionally killed for what they said in verse, and occasionally for what they didn't. The meter itself was protective. Elaborate formal structure made it harder to claim a line meant something other than what it said. Plausible deniability, locked-in alliteration. The poem shifts. This section's about the sea, the whale road, naturally, a ship pressing west against weather that didn't care. You've heard this part before, or something enough like it, that the shapes are familiar. The grey water, the carved prow, the men who didn't come back. The fire pops. A coal shifts. Someone adjusts a sleeping child without waking them, which is the most practiced gesture in this household. The visiting traveller, a man named Haldor, on the road since the thaw, sleeping wherever the next hall lets him in, has a tooth ground flat on one side. 20 winters of barley flatbread will do that. Haldor knows 4 different versions of this poem, and he'll pick which one based on who's in the room. He's reading the room right now, mid-recitation. You can tell, because his eyes aren't closed. The hall goes quiet in a specific way when the recitation ends. Not silence. The fire and the animals and the breathing don't stop. But the room holds the shape of the story for a moment, before the shape dissolves. Someone coughs. Someone asks a question about a name in the poem. The answer is short. Nobody writes it down. You row out before light. The boat is a fairing, 4 oars, low sides, open from end to end, and you are heading into the cod grounds with 3 other men, none of whom can swim. The water is between 2 and 5 degrees Celsius. The air is colder. The wind has decided to disagree with the current. You row for 2 hours to the fishing line, work the line for several more, and row back. Most days this works. Some days it does not. The Lofoten Islands are the centre of the Norse cod economy by the 10th century, and the cod grounds here are genuinely extraordinary. Enormous shoals of scry, Atlantic cod migrating south from the Barents Sea, arriving with reliable timing every winter. The fish are here. You are here. The question is whether the sea has opinions about the schedule, and the sea almost always does. The cold here is not the air cold, which is its own problem. The cold here is the water. 3 degrees Celsius is the kind of cold that doesn't argue with you, it just walks in, sits down and starts taking inventory of your body's most important systems. 10 to 30 minutes depending on how stubbornly your hands decide to stay attached. Not before you die, before your hands stop working. The dying comes after, and it's quieter than you'd expect. The water is patient about it. The decision not to learn swimming isn't ignorance, it's arithmetic. The water is cold enough that swimming buys you minutes, not survival, and spending those minutes struggling rather than floating calmly is arguably worse. You go in, you go still, and you let the current decide. This reasoning is, in fact, correct. It's also the most resigned cost-benefit analysis in the history of water. The boat itself is beautiful in the way that functional things become beautiful after centuries of refinement. Low sides so you can haul line over the gunwale without breaking your back. Shallow draft so you can beach anywhere. Light enough that 4 men can carry it. It's also completely open to the sky, which means the wind comes through on all sides simultaneously, which means your cloak is wet within the first 20 minutes and stays that way for the rest of the day. The turn shoes are already soaked. They were soaked at the shoreline. The leather still faintly smells of the animal it used to be, which is either comforting or not, depending on how the morning is going. The fishing line goes down. You wait. There's a specific quality to waiting in an open boat in the dark on cold water. The cold arrives in stages, first the hands, then the feet, then that particular numbness at the back of the neck that stops being uncomfortable and starts just being the weather. A torch made of dried fish oil burns at the bow, smelling unmistakably like dinner, which is a confusing message to send a body that is also currently the temperature of dinner. Your brother Thorkel, his neighbour Sven, and a quiet older man called Ragnvold don't talk much. Ragnvold vets his line with the unhurried gravity of a man placing a wreath. Ragnvald has been doing this since he was 11, and the cold water has nothing left to tell him that the cold water hasn't already said. The cod, when they come in quantity. The scry is big, meaty, the kind of fish that justifies the whole enterprise. You haul, gut and stack. Your hands are doing the work on a kind of muscle memory autopilot, because actual deliberate finger coordination left sometime around the first hour. The fish don't care. They cooperate fully with the process of being caught, which is the one part of the morning going according to plan. Back at shore, the catch goes to drying racks. Stockfish, wind-dried cod, no salt required, can last for years once it's fully dried, which makes it less a food and more a hedge against the future. By the 10th century, it's an export commodity, reaching as far as Britain and the Frankish coast. You've turned frozen misery into international trade, which is basically what the entire Norse economy runs on. You pull the boat up. Your cloak weighs twice what it did this morning. Your hands are making a reasonable attempt to return to normal function, and mostly succeeding. Nobody fell in today. That's the whole summary. Nobody fell in. You hang the cod. The fish are split, salted only sometimes, mostly just hung on tall wooden racks in the wind off the fjord, where they dry over a period of months into a hard, almost wood-like state called stockfish. The racks are taller than the longhouse. The smell carries for kilometres. The dried fish will keep for years and is one of the few things in the household economy that can be traded for foreign silver. You check the racks every morning. The wind does the rest. The cod starts out as something recognisable. A fish, recently alive, recently pulled from water that nearly killed the person pulling it. 6 weeks later, it's closer to driftwood. You tap it against the rack post, and it makes a sound like a plank. It doesn't smell like food anymore. It smells like the idea of food, preserved in the abstract, compressed into something you could theoretically swing as a tool. You'd need to soak it for a day or two before it returns to anything edible. The fish is patient about this. The scale is large. A single family's winter stores might include hundreds of these. They hang in rows, stiff and pale, swaying very slightly in the fjord wind. Each one is a morning in an open boat in water cold enough to kill you in 20 minutes. You do not look at them sentimentally. You count them. By the 10th century, stockfish from the Lofoten Islands is moving south along trade routes to Britain, the Rhineland, and eventually further, which makes it basically the Norwegian equivalent of an Amazon fulfillment item, except the warehouse is the open Arctic air. and the product ships itself if you wait long enough. Merchants in Bergen will eventually build entire fortunes on it. Right now, it's just your roof that doesn't leak, and your children who don't starve, converted into a flat, rigid fish and hung on a post. A man from the trading post comes by in early spring to inspect the racks. He doesn't touch the fish. He walks slowly down the rows, eyes moving, occasionally tipping his head to one side like a person reading a document he mostly already knows the contents of. He quotes you a price in hacksilver, a small folded bit of someone's former armling, already weighed and waiting in a cloth pouch at his belt. You don't negotiate loudly. You negotiate quietly, standing in the smell, both of you knowing roughly what the fish is worth, and neither of you being entirely honest about it. The stockfish that doesn't sell stays. It keeps. That's the point of it. Stored in the rafters of the longhouse, or in an outbuilding, it sits through the following winter without complaint, which is more than can be said for most of the other food. Sky goes, if the barrel's compromised. Salt meat goes, if the brine wasn't right. Stockfish just waits, getting slightly harder, getting slightly more like wood, holding its nutritional value with a stubbornness that borders on personality. There's also the vitamin C problem, which the stockfish quietly solves. Raw or lightly dried fish retains ascorbic acid in quantities that cooked food destroys. You don't know this. Nobody in the 10th century knows this. You know only that people who eat raw fish through the winter don't get the swollen gums and loosening teeth that occasionally appear in households that don't. The fish figured it out before you did. The racks stand through summer, through autumn, through the following fishing season. They're one of the more permanent structures near the longhouse. The wood weathers grey. The crossbars develop a faint crust of dried scales and salt air. By midsummer they're empty, and they stay empty until January, when the scrae come back, and the boats go out again, and the whole arrangement begins from the beginning. The racks don't care either way. You pay for grain. You do not pay in coins, because the household silver is not in coin form. It is in fragments, snipped from arm rings, from broken pendants, from foreign coins traded back from the East. The merchant has a small set of bronze scales and a known weight. You set your fragment on one side, and watch him add weights until the scales agree. The fragment was, until recently, part of your aunt's wedding ring. The merchant does not ask. Nobody ever asks. This is hacksilver, which is basically Venmo, except the Venmo is shards of someone else's grandmother's jewellery, and you carry the scale yourself. Every household with any silver at all keeps a small pouch of it, irregular pieces in different sizes, some with engraving still visible on one edge, some that used to be Arabic dirhams, before someone snipped a corner off. The dirham has travelled from Baghdad to the Volga, to a Norse trader's belt, to your floor. It's had a long career. It doesn't look like much now. The scales are the important part. You don't trust memory, and you don't trust faces. You trust the scales. A dishonest merchant with a bent weight arm is the Viking Age equivalent of a rigged gas pump, and the response is roughly as calm. Arguments over hacksilver weights end badly, and regularly. The scales have opinions. So does everyone in earshot. The silver comes from a long way. Some of it is raided, which is the part everyone knows. Most of it isn't. Most Norse silver arrives through trade, down the Volga and Dnieper rivers, through Rus territories, into Byzantine and Abbasid markets, where furs and amber and, less discussed, thralls are exchanged for Eastern silver. The Varangians, Norse traders and mercenaries working the eastern routes, are essentially the DHL of the medieval world, except the cargo sometimes talks back, and the route as wolves. The Curedale hoard, buried around 905 CE near the Ribble River in Lancashire, holds 40 kilograms of silver when it's eventually found. Ingots, arm rings, coins from a dozen different cultures, fragments of fragments. It's the petty cash box of an entire Norse military force, and it fits in a lead chest, the size of a carry-on bag. 40 kilograms of someone's family jewellery, trade goods and battlefield winnings, converted into portable purchasing power, and buried in Lancashire, which is not a sentence anyone planned to write. Back in your hall, the merchant wraps the scales back into their leather pouch. The grain is agreed. You take the sack. The remaining silver goes back into the pouch at your belt, a thumb-sized piece that used to be an ingot. 2 bits of Arabic coin with the calligraphy worn smooth, and 1 small irregular lump that nobody in the household can identify anymore. It might be from a brooch, it might be from a cup. It's silver. That's what it is now. The arm ring is worth noting, because it isn't purely decorative. A Jarl gives arm rings to his warriors as payment and as public proof of generosity. A warrior wears his rings as a walking account balance. When cash is needed, he snips a section off, which is the most committed form of liquidating an asset most people will ever witness. Your aunt's wedding ring was probably an arm ring first. Before that, it was someone else's trade goods. Before that, it was a vein of ore in a mountain somewhere east of anywhere you've been. The merchant leaves before the light goes, which isn't long from now. The grain sits in its sack near the door. The scales are already 3 farms down the road. You give an instruction. The instruction goes to a thrall, a household slave captured in a raid 2 summers ago, kept fed, kept clothed, kept working, and not free to leave. The thrall does the worst of the labour. The byre cleaning, the heaviest carrying, the night watch on the lambs. You do not pay the thrall. You do not need to explain anything to the thrall. The thrall sleeps closer to the animals than you do. There is a word for this, and the word is normal. Almost every longhouse in the valley has one. Some have 2. Some, the larger ones, have 6. The thrall at the partition was bought in Dublin 3 years ago. The thrall in the next farm over was born to a thralled mother and inherited the status before he could walk. Between 1 in 10 and 1 in 3 of the people you'll see this winter are property in the same way your axe is property. Dublin from around 841 CE operates as a major Norse slave market, which is basically an Amazon fulfillment centre for human beings, except the logistics are longships and the returns policy is a sword. Irish captives, English captives, Frankish captives. The raids that everyone pictures when they picture the Viking Age weren't primarily about silver. They were very often about this. If the thrall is injured during winter labour, the conversation goes to the thing. You sit on one side of the speaker. The man whose dog mauled the thrall sits on the other. The matter is settled the same way a damaged ox is settled, compensation paid in hack silver, weighed on the scales, no second page on the form. The thrall does not speak at the thing. The dog does not speak at the thing. The arrangement is symmetrical in that respect. A carl, a free farmer, sits 2 benches over. He owns his land, his tools, his animals, and his labour. He attends the thing. His name goes on the tally. The wall between him and the thrall is the partition itself, a metre of wood and several cold draughts. Both of them are cold. Both of them smell like the animals. One of them can leave. The Jarl is further away. The Jarl has more thralls, more carls, working his land, and more arm rings to cut apart when something needs paying for. The Jarl's longhouse is larger. The fire is larger. Same smoke, same roof hole, same 10 degrees Celsius if you're lucky and standing close. Sometimes a thrall is freed, granted the status of a lay singer, a freed person. It happens slowly. It happens without paperwork. There's no HR department processing the manumission. You decide, one summer, that the work has been done. You walk to the thing. You say it out loud. The thrall is now a lysinger, which is freer than a thrall and considerably less free than a carl. Most thralls do not get this conversation. The thrall at the partition hands you a bowl of skyr, stored in a wooden barrel that hadn't been opened since October, and doesn't make eye contact. You take the bowl. The skyr is cold. The transaction is complete. Neither of you comments on any of it. because commentary isn't part of the arrangement, and the arrangement has been the same since before either of you was born. You bathe on Saturday. The Old Norse word for Saturday is lagadagur, which means, in plain translation, bathing day, and the household does in fact use it for that. You walk to the badstofu, a small turf hut behind the main building, and sit on a wooden bench while heated stones release steam into the air, and water from a wooden ladle hits the stones with a hiss. You sweat. The lice on your scalp also sweat. They will be back by Monday. The badstofu is a small turf hut full of naked Norse, communal sweat, and a room full of parasites who have all opted in to the same membership scheme. Still, it's warm, genuinely warm, which in December is a resource worth walking through slush for. The heated stones radiate the kind of authority a stone has after spending 6 hours in a fire and being asked, calmly, to give it back. A man from the next holding, Bjarni, who married your second cousin and has not stopped reminding everyone since, arrives with his own ladle and a block of soap made from rendered fat and wood ash. Bjarni nods. You nod. He sits on the bench and doesn't speak because there isn't really anything to say. The steam does the conversation. His soap has strong opinions about your forearm and expresses them vigorously. The soap, for the record, works. The Norse are not the unwashed population that French chroniclers occasionally implied. You wash your hair with the ash soap, you rinse it with hot water, and you do this every week without exception because lagadagur is not a suggestion, it's built into the name of the day. The hygiene is genuine, real, consistent. The parasites are also genuine, real, consistent. Latrine excavations at Coppergate in York, a Norse settlement, confirm roundworm, whipworm and tapeworm in the soil deposits. Every household, every season. The worms don't care about the soap. They live deeper than soap reaches, in the gut and the water and the grain stored since autumn, and they've established a residency that no Saturday ritual interrupts. You're clean on the outside. The inside is a different administrative district. You scrape your skin with a wooden tools, something close to a strigil, which is what Romans used, and also what anyone uses when cloth is too precious to rub on wet skin, unnecessarily. The scraping removes the outer layer of soot and tallow, and 7 days of accumulated longhouse atmosphere, which had begun to constitute its own weather system. You feel human again. Briefly, specifically, until you put your wool tunic back on, which has been sitting in the longhouse all week, absorbing smoke and animal damp, and smells accordingly. The wool doesn't apologize. It's wool. It was a sheep 3 winters ago, and it remembers. Back inside, the fire is going. Palskanau. Someone has left a wooden comb near the hearth for delousing, and the children are being processed through it with the cheerful efficiency of a toll booth. The comb is a fine-toothed tool, bone or antler, and it's found at every Norse archaeological site in significant quantities, which tells you it was used hard, used often, and replaced when it broke. It's the most consistent object in the archaeological record. More consistent than swords. More consistent than ship rivets. The Norse have a word for the kind of clean you feel after the badstøy war. They don't have a word for germ, or parasite, or the concept of internal contamination spreading through shared water. The gap between those two vocabularies is where most of the winter illness lives. Saturday night, you sit near the fire. The air is marginally better than it was this morning. Your hair is damp. The steam has loosened something in your chest that had been sitting there since November. Somebody's grandmother is already spinning again by the light of a fish oil lamp, which burns with the smell of low tide and keeps her awake just enough to keep the thread even. Shall bathe again next Saturday. Same bench, same stones, same lice. They really will be back by Monday. You take an injury, specifically a wound to the abdomen during a chopping accident, and the household sends for the lacquer, the healer, who is the closest thing the region has to a doctor, except the closest thing the region has to a doctor uses smell as a diagnostic tool. He feeds you a thin gruel of crushed onion and garlic. say Freds. He waits. He bends over the wound. He inhales. If the wound smells of onion, the news is bad. The diagnostic is correct. The diagnostic is not gentle. The logic is sound. Actually, if the intestines are perforated, the garlic and onion pass through into the abdominal cavity, where they don't belong, and the wound broadcasts the fact. The lacquer isn't guessing. He's using available technology. The available technology is his nose. After the smell test, the work continues. Wounds that aren't perforated get cleaned, packed with moss or wool, and wrapped. Yarrow stops bleeding. Juniper has antimicrobial properties the lacquer doesn't have a word for, but has noticed empirically over a career of looking at wounds. Willow bark handles pain, which is, functionally, an unpatented proto-aspirin discovered several hundred years before anyone wrote it down. The lacquer's kit is basically a CVS travel bag, except the CVS is a forest and the bag is whatever he carried in his hand. He doesn't always work alone. Your great Aunt Asta is the household's quieter authority, not the lacquer's legal designation, but a quieter kind of knowledge, accumulated through 40 years of births and fevers and frostbite and winters, where the alternative was nothing. Asta knows which infants are struggling and why. Asta has opinions about the barley supply. Asta's opinions are usually correct, and the lacquer, who is 57 and nobody's idiot, has learned to ask her before he commits to a diagnosis. Fractures get splintered with wood and bound tight. Dislocations get reduced, meaning someone holds you down while someone else pulls the joint back into place. No anesthesia. The pulling counts as the procedure. You bite down on whatever is in reach, and the person holding your shoulders doesn't look at your face. Dental work, if it happens at all, is extraction. The same tooth ground flat from 20 winters of barley flatbread doesn't get repaired. It gets removed, or it stays hurting, until something else becomes more urgent. Skeletal evidence from Norse burial sites shows widespread dental wear, abscesses, and tooth loss, beginning in early adulthood. The teeth kept a very thorough record. The lacquer charges for his services in hacksilver, or grain, or labour owed. There's no billing department. There's no second opinion. Sumal maive salmturi siebelsive summonium sive sumalm. There's no follow-up appointment, unless he decides to come back, which depends on how far he lives and what the weather is doing. You recover or you don't, and the household continues. Outlawry meant you couldn't access any of this. No lacquer, no food, no shelter, which is basically being permanently banned from the healthcare system. Except the ban is legally enforceable with a spear. The lacquer bends over the wound. He inhales. He waits. You watch his face for the answer before he gives it. Your cloak is wet. It has been wet since yesterday's walk back from the woodpile, and wool, when wet, behaves not like clothing but like a piece of furniture you are wearing. It is heavier, it is colder than dry wool. It does not dry overnight by the fire because the fire is not that strong, and the cloak is not hung that close. You will wear the wet cloak again tomorrow. There is no second cloak. The cloak is part of you now, and it is not pleased. Let's talk about the turned shoe. It's not a shoe. It's a piece of untanned cow leather gathered at the ankle with a drawstring, the leather still smelling faintly of the cow it used to be. The moment you step into snow or slush, the leather saturates. Not gradually. Immediately. You have wet feet before you reach the woodpile. You have wet feet during the walk. You will have wet feet until you take the shoes off, which you won't because the floor is cold. The turn shoe is, in engineering terms, a sock that briefly believed in itself. Your leg wrappings help. Little. They are strips of woven wool wound from ankle to knee, which slow the cold somewhat and give the impression of a plan. They are not waterproof. Nothing you are wearing is waterproof. Your cloak has been treated with lanolin, which makes it closer to water-resistant than water-permeable, and the difference on a sleet grey December morning is purely theoretical. Fingertip dexterity goes next. By the time you've carried the third armload of wood, your hands are doing that thing where you can see them working but you can't quite feel them working, which is basically the same problem as using a touchscreen with gloves on, except the gloves are wet and the touchscreen is an axe handle. You adjust your grip. The wood doesn't care. The cloak itself weighs somewhere between 2 and 4 kilograms dry, wet. It's pulling on your shoulders with the determined authority of a piece of furniture that has decided to travel. You wear it anyway because the alternative is not wearing it. This is not a dilemma. It barely rises to the level of a decision. The cloak was made by your aunt. She fooled it herself last winter, beating the woven loth in a tub of stale urine and lukewarm water until the fibres matted tight. The fulling makes it denser. The fulling makes it warmer. The fulling does not, however, make it waterproof, because waterproofing is not on the list of things wool does, and your aunt has never claimed otherwise. A jarl's wife in a larger household might own 2 cloaks. You know this the way you know things that don't apply to you. One cloak hangs drying by the fire. One cloak goes on her back. The dry one is always the one on the hook. By the time you are important enough to own 2 cloaks, someone else is carrying the wood. There's a version of this problem that gets worse before it gets better. Your undertunic is wool. Your trousers are wool. The cloak is wool. Everything is wet at different rates and drying at different rates. So at no point during a winter day are you fully dry or fully soaked. You are always somewhere in the middle, which is its own specific kind of cold. Not dramatic, not urgent, just present. The damp is very committed. By evening you hang the cloak near the fire. The cloak steams. The hall smells like wet wool added to the existing smell of smoke and ammonia and damp animals, which is a combination that has no modern equivalent except possibly a gym locker room that someone has set on fire. You sit by the fire. The cloak dries unevenly. The edges stay damp. Tomorrow it goes back on. Your gums hurt. It is February, and the autumn berries are gone, and the stored vegetables are gone, and the dairy and dried fish that have been keeping the household alive contain no vitamin C, which is a word nobody in the room knows. The household's response is older than the word. You chew pine needles. You eat the raw or fermented fish. You drink a thin broth of birch bark. The gums recover slowly. Some seasons they do not. Some teeth, by spring, are already loose. Scurvy doesn't announce itself. It arrives gradually, the way cold does, as a mild inconvenience that becomes a structural problem before you've registered the transition. Your joints ache. You're tired. You assume it's February, because February requires no further explanation. Then you notice the gums. Then you notice the bruising. Then you count your teeth the way a sensible person counts their livestock, with the specific dread of discovering a discrepancy. The pine needle isn't a folk remedy in the whimsical sense. It's a delivery mechanism for something the body requires and can't manufacture, extracted from the only green thing in the landscape that hasn't frozen solid. You strip the needles from a branch, put them in your mouth, and chew. They taste like the forest floor, sharp, resinous, faintly medicinal. Not good, not bad, just aggressively botanical. Raw fermented fish handles the same problem from a different direction. The fermentation process preserves trace nutrients that cooking would destroy, which means the barrel of fermented herring you've been eating all winter, out of grim necessity, has also been quietly preventing the collapse of your connective tissue. The barrel is older than your marriage and smells like a creature that has earned the right to be feared. The dosage instructions are: eat what your grandmother tells you to eat, and your grandmother does not negotiate. Let's talk about the barrel. It's been in the longhouse since October. It hasn't been opened fully since November, because opening it fully produces a smell that has opinions about personal space. You ladle from it with a wooden spoon that has absorbed the smell permanently. The spoon doesn't complain. The spoon has been in this household longer than any child currently living. Ergotism is the other winter food problem, and it arrives from the opposite direction entirely. Scurvy is a slow subtraction. Ergotism is an event. The Claviceps purpurea fungus grows on rye grain, stored in cold, damp conditions, which describes every grain store in Denmark for approximately 8 months of the year. Eat enough contaminated bread, and your fingers go numb. Your vision distorts. You have convulsions. Your extremities, in bad cases, develop a dry gangrene that the Norse called holy fire because it burned without flame. A limb turns black. A limb falls off. The bread did that. Nobody connects the bread to the symptoms. The connection isn't made in Europe until the early 18th century. Before that, it's God. It's bad luck. It's a visitation. The bread goes back in the barrel. Dental ware tells its own story. Skeletal evidence from Norse burial sites shows teeth ground flat from a lifetime of barley flatbread, barley ground on stone querns that shed grit into the flour, so every meal contained a small amount of abrasive material. By age 30, many Norse adults have worn their molars down to the pulp. By 40, jaw infections are common. A tooth ground flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread is not a metaphor for anything. It's just a tooth, doing its job until it can't. The Norse also used their teeth as tools, gripping rope, cracking bone, holding textile work taut while hands were occupied. The jaw was a third hand. It was treated accordingly, which is to say, it was worked hard and replaced never. By late February, the household's vitamin situation is improving slightly, not because anything has been obtained, but because the days are lengthening by a few minutes each morning, which everyone has noticed, and nobody is saying out loud, in case naming it invites reversal. The pine needles are still going in. The fermented fish is still coming out of the barrel with the wooden spoon. Your gums are less alarming than they were in January. Some winters, that's the best you can say for February. You eat the rye loaf. The rye comes from a southerly field, harvested last summer, ground by a household quern, baked yesterday on the stone. Sometimes the rye is fine. Sometimes the rye carries Claviceps purpurea, a fungus that grows on the grain in damp years and survives milling, and the household begins, over the course of a few hours, to see things that are not in the room. Sometimes hands and feet go numb. Sometimes the numbness becomes black. There is no test. There is only the loaf. The fungus grows on rye ears as a hard, dark, purple body called a sclerotium. It looks like a bad grain. You can't always see it. You can't smell it out. The sclerotium has the bearing of something that knows it's about to attend a wedding it was not invited to. The quern grinds it in with everything else, the way a quern grinds anything, with no opinion of its own, and no curriculum vitae for the grain it processes. Ergotism runs in 2 forms. The convulsive kind gives you seizures, hallucinations, and a very alarming few days that your household will later describe to the lacquer in careful, frightened detail. The gangrenous kind is quieter. Fingers tingle. Toes go cold in a way that isn't just the floor. Over days, the extremities begin to darken. The blood supply constricts until tissue dies from the outside in. You lose a finger, then maybe 2. The limb doesn't announce itself. It just stops being useful, and then stops being there. No one in the Norse world knows what's causing it. The fungus-grain connection won't be established until 1676, which is a long time to be losing fingers to bread. The lacquer attributes the episodes to bad air, an imbalance in the humours, or divine displeasure, the standard diagnostic sweep when the actual answer is microscopic and 6 centuries away. Danish regions see it more often than Norwegian ones, because rye grows better in flatter, wetter lowlands. Southern fields, damp autumns, a harvest stored in a barn that didn't dry properly. These are the conditions. You don't know this. You know that some years the bread is fine, and some years it isn't, and the years it isn't are not years you discuss calmly. Your cousin Helga starts laughing at something near the roof beam. Nothing is near the roof beam. Helga laughs for a while and then stops and doesn't explain. Your Uncle Olaf's hand, which was slightly off colour at breakfast, is fully grey by mid-afternoon. Olaf holds it near the fire. The fire doesn't help. The fire has not been the problem. The household watches. There's not much else to do. The Lakar, if you're close enough to one, might prescribe fasting, or a poultice, or a specific prayer. The poultice doesn't address claviceps purpurea, because no one knows. Claviceps purpurea is a word yet. The prayer is sincere. What actually reduces risk is luck, a dry summer, a well-stored grain barrel, a field that happened to be less infected that year. You don't control any of these variables. You grind what you harvested. You bake what you ground. You eat what you baked, which is the closest thing to a Norse roulette wheel that doesn't involve open water. The remaining rye in the barrel looks identical whether it's clean or not. It smells like rye. It weighs what rye weighs. The barrel, which has been sitting in the corner since October, watches all of this unfold with the patient indifference of a witness who has been told not to involve itself. By mid-February, you're eating from the bottom of it, which is where the damp grain settles, which is where the fungus concentrates. The barrel knew this all along, and the barrel, on principle, does not say. You kill the animals you cannot feed. The month is called Blot Manutha, sacrifice month, and it falls in late October or early November. When the grass is gone, the hay is rationed, and the household has done the math on how many livestock can survive the winter on the available fodder. The math is precise. The math is unsentimental. The animals not on the survival list are slaughtered, drained, butchered, smoked, and hung. The household eats fresh meat for a week. It is the only fresh meat of the year. The slaughter itself is not a grim occasion. It's closer to a harvest festival, which is basically Thanksgiving, except the turkey is a pig you named, and the cooking happens outside in the cold, and everyone's hands are red from the work before noon. Neighbours help. Neighbours are fed. The blood goes into sausage casings. The fat gets rendered. The bones get boiled. Nothing with caloric value is discarded. Stuanoch. C-T-A-A-N-D-G died. Your mother Ingrid, knife in one hand and a wooden bucket between her boots, works the blood before it thickens. Ingrid doesn't rush, but she doesn't pause either. Ingrid has been on bucket duty since 989 CE, which is a longer track record than most LLC partnerships. The bucket has opinions about how full it will stay on uneven ground. The ground is always uneven in late October. The choice of which animals survive is not sentimental, but it's not random either. You keep your breeding stock. You keep the animals that produced well this year. You keep the ones most likely to produce well next year. The old ewe who didn't lamb in spring is not on the survival list. The cow who went dry in August is not on the survival list. The goat who escaped twice and destroyed the barley storage is absolutely not on the survival list. The goat is first. Meat gets preserved 3 ways: smoking, drying, and salt brining in wooden casks. Salt is expensive. Salt comes from coastal evaporation or trade, and it doesn't arrive free. So a lot of what gets preserved is smoked and dried rather than salted, which means by February it's a specific texture, which is to say, it requires jaw muscles you've had to develop over years of this diet. A tooth ground flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread is already doing the work. The dried meat just confirms it. The word blot also means ritual offering, which means some of the slaughter goes to the gods. The Asir get their portion. Odin gets blood. The animal's blood gets sprinkled on the wooden pillars of the hall, on the carved figures if you have them. On the threshold, the house is marked as provisioned and protected. Whether the house actually is protected will become apparent sometime around February. The blot feast lasts several days. Allah is brewed. Sky comes out of the barrel it's been sitting in since summer. There's fresh liver, because liver doesn't keep and waiting doesn't improve it. The hall is as warm as it gets, which is still not warm by any standard a modern thermostat would recognize, but it's full of bodies and fire and steam rising off wet wool, and that's the closest thing to comfort the calendar offers. By the end of the week, the fresh meat is gone. What's left is everything you smoked, everything you dried, everything you packed in brine. You'll ration it across 4 more months. The math on that is also precise, also unsentimental. The slaughter month ends, and winter begins in earnest, and the household settles into the long project of eating carefully enough that everyone is still alive when the grass comes back. You wear 2 pendants. One is a small Thor's hammer, cast in silver. The other, on the same cord, is a small cross, also cast in silver, and probably from the same mould. Trengorden in Denmark has yielded moulds capable of producing both, used by the same craftsman in the same workshop. The conversion is in progress. The conversion is not finished. Combo, to Wesseer. The household is hedging. The pendants are kept under the tunic, where neither the priest nor the Gothi can see which one is on top today. Helmoan I 5, probably. Amon Seed 9 the Seer Dordo. The craftsman at Trengorden is named Sven. Svein isn't confused. Svein is diversified. The same hands that pour silver into the hammer impression pour silver into the cross impression, let both cool, unmold both, and sell both at the same market price. It's basically the Etsy shop where the seller stocks both blessed by Jesus and blessed by Odin, and has strong reviews in either column. The religious transformation of an entire civilization is proceeding, and someone is making a modest living from exactly how long it's taking. Christianization in Scandinavia isn't a single event. It's a slow overlap like 2 fires burning toward each other across a field, and neither one winning for several decades. Norway's Olaf Haraldsson pushes baptism with the kind of enthusiasm that has a sword behind it. Iceland's formal conversion happens in the year 1000 CE, decided at the Thing, the assembly, by a single Gothi who lies under a cloak for 2 days before announcing his decision. The cloak is still there when he emerges. He announces that Iceland will be Christian, officially, and that private blot will be permitted to continue, quietly, for the time being. He's put the cloak back on, while talking. The cloak, to its credit, stays neutral. At home, the transition looks like this. You know the words for a Christian prayer. You also know which post in the longhouse is the seat of the house spirit, and you leave a small piece of bread there before you sleep, because you've been doing it since before your grandmother was born, and the bread is already in your hand. The priest comes through in summer. The Gothi comes through in autumn. Both of them drink your ale. Neither one asks too hard about what you do between visits. The Aesir aren't gone. They're just quieter. Odin still governs the kind of death worth having. Fallen in battle, taken by Valkyries, delivered to Valhall. Hel, his daughter, governs the other kind. Hel's hall is cold and dim, which is not very different from your longhouse in January, except it's permanent, and no one is butchering a pig to mark the season. The new Christian afterlife offers warmth and light, which, if you've spent enough winters at the far end of a hall watching your breath cloud in the dark, has a very specific marketing advantage. The Thor's hammer pendant is the size of your thumbnail. It weighs almost nothing. It's been worn smooth at the top where the cord runs through it, which means it was someone else's before it was yours. The cross pendant is newer, sharper at the edges. It came from a trader named Hakon who passed through in September, the same Hakon who brought salt and a bolt of undyed linen and a story about a king 3 kingdoms east who'd converted and then immediately won a battle, which is the kind of detail Hakon knew would move product. Hakon is, professionally, a king's conversion content distributor. He has another story ready for next year. Both pendants sit against your sternum. The fire is low. The cattle shift and breathe at the far end of the hall. Outside, the dark is complete. 8 weeks until there's enough light to work by in the afternoon. You're not sure which one is on top. You don't check. Whichever one is working, it's working quietly, and that seems like enough. You have been challenged to a duel. The duel is a holmganger, island-going, and the rules are formal, written, and old. You meet on a marked cloth, 3 shields are permitted each combatant. The first to bleed loses in some versions, and the first to die loses in others. You did not start the dispute. The dispute has come to you through 3 generations of accumulated grievance. Your only options are to show up, to refuse, or to leave the region permanently. Refusal is the worst option. Refusal is called naive. It's a formal accusation of cowardice, and in Norse society it has roughly the social weight of a public notarized document declaring you contemptible. You don't just lose the argument, you lose the ability to do business with neighbours, to make alliances, to collect debts, to expect basic courtesy at the thing. The word follows you the way a bad Yelp review follows a restaurant, except the review is carved into a stone post in front of your house where everyone walks past it every morning. The grievance itself could be anything. Land boundaries, most likely. A grazing encroachment. A remark made at a feast 3 winters ago that someone's father heard second-hand. Inheritance disputes that have been fermenting since before you were born. Norse feuding ran on compound interest. Each generation inherited not just the farm and the debt, but the unresolved insult attached to both. You're not here because of something you did. You're here because of something your grandfather said to someone's grandfather, and both of them are in hell now, which is the cold, dark place, not the interesting one. The holmganger is scheduled. This is the thing that would surprise you most, coming from the outside, that it's scheduled. There's a date, a location, witnesses, a referee of sorts. The cloth is staked to the ground, with hazel rods marking the boundary. You don't fight outside it. Stepping off the cloth is surrender. The whole system is less like a brawl and more like a formal HR process. Except HR has an axe, and the outcome is legally binding. The shields are linden wood and an iron boss. 3 is your allowance. When a shield is split, and they split fast, because shields in this period are linden wood held together by a central iron boss and optimism, you hand it off and take the next one. Once the 3rd shield is gone, you're holding nothing. The fight continues. Your opponent doesn't wait. Nobody calls a pause to check in on how you're feeling about this development. Nobody calls a pause. There are professional duelists. They travel. They show up at a farm with a formal challenge over an old grievance nobody remembers, fight whichever family member draws the short straw, and walk away with the disputed land. The professional is sometimes called a berserker. He is basically a protection racket with formal paperwork. Iceland outlawed professional dueling around 1006 scurvy. The challenges did not stop. They just started looking more like grievances. Your opponent today is not a professional. He's your neighbour Theo Valdra. You've eaten at the same fire. Thordvaldars' children know your children. None of that changes anything about the cloth, or the hazel rods, or the 3 shields. Thorvald shows up at the agreed hour. He is wearing the same wool tunic he was wearing at last summer's harvest feast, which his wife Gunhildr fooled herself, and which has a small repaired tear at the shoulder from where one of your goats found it on the line in August. The witnesses arrive early. They're here partly for legitimacy, and partly because this is the most interesting thing happening in the valley until spring. A skald might be present. If the fight goes well, or badly enough, it'll be in a verse by nightfall. Your name will be in it. The meter will be correct. You bring your case to the thing. The thing is the regional assembly, held outdoors at a recognized site, attended by free men of the area, presided over by a law speaker who carries the law in his memory because the law is not written down. There is no judge. There is no jury. There is consensus, eventually, after several days of speech. There is no police force to enforce the verdict if you lose. There is also no police force to protect you if you win. The verdict is whatever the assembly agrees it is. The law speaker, Thurgrimina, 60s, 11th year in the role, 3rd pair of shoes since starting, recites the relevant law from memory. He stands in the centre of the assembly field and speaks loud enough for the people at the edges to hear, which is harder than it sounds when the wind is coming off a Norwegian hillside in early summer and the man 3 rows back has a cough. Thorgrimund recites 1/3 of the entire law code per year, rotating through it on a 3-year cycle because that's the job. The law lives behind his teeth like a creature that pays rent. Forgetting a clause is not a career setback, it's a community crisis, and the creature behind his teeth knows this very well. You state your case. Your opponent states his. Witnesses speak. Character witnesses speak after them. Someone's neighbour has an opinion. The neighbour's opinion takes longer than expected. Everyone is standing in a field. It's been 3 days. The thing doesn't need a building. Major ones, like the Icelandic Althing at Thingvel, established around 930 CE, were held in natural amphitheatres where rock formations helped carry sound. You camped there. You brought food. You brought your dispute and also your tent. Because this was going to take a while, and the verdict wasn't arriving before dinner. If the assembly rules against you, the enforcement mechanism is social pressure and the mutual interest of your kin group in complying. There's no bailiff. There's no warrant. Your neighbour rules in your favour, and the other party simply decides not to comply. That becomes its own new dispute, brought back to the next thing, which meets again in a year. The legal system runs on a 12-month refresh cycle. The worst outcome isn't a fine. The worst outcome is utslag. Foleg. Soleg. Out. Lowery. The assembly declares you outside the law, and at that point, you're outside everything else too. Anyone can kill you without legal consequence. No one's allowed to feed you or shelter you. You can't stay in the longhouse. You can't sleep in a barn. You can't buy food at market. It's basically being kicked out of the group chat, except the group chat is every person you've ever met, and the kick comes with a knife. Full outlawry lasted 3 years minimum. Lesser outlawry, Fjorbaud's was a 3-year exile with the option to return. You paid fines, you left, you hoped the situation had cooled by the time you came back. A man convicted of serious crimes against another family didn't just face personal consequences. His kin group faced them too. The feud you arrived here to resolve, the same one covered in Holdenganger and Neath and 3 generations of grievance, might get a legal verdict today, or it might get postponed while both sides argue about which version of events is accurate, which witnesses are credible, and whether that cow was actually stolen or simply wandered. The law speaker doesn't rule. He recites. The ruling emerges from the crowd. That tooth ground flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread, the one you've been pushing your tongue against since Tuesday, has had more structural integrity than most of the proceedings. You've been standing in a field for 4 days. The assembly has reached a consensus. The consensus is that your neighbour owes you half a silver arm ring's worth of compensation, to be weighed on your portable scale at a time, to be mutually agreed. Your neighbour looks at you across the assembly. He doesn't look like a man who has agreed to anything. You have been declared an outlaw. The Old Norse word is utlag, and the verdict has consequences that are immediate and total. Anyone may legally kill you, no one may legally feed you, no one may legally shelter you, and no one is required to warn you of an approaching killer. The household property is forfeit. The marriage is dissolved. You have between sundown today and sundown tomorrow to leave the region. The region is large. The night beyond the longhouse fires is not. The utlag verdict is basically being kicked out of the group chat, except the group chat is everyone you have ever met, and the kick comes with a knife. There's no appeal process. There's no oversight committee reviewing the law speaker's decision. The thing has spoken, the assembly has witnessed, and the social contract that kept you alive, the one where neighbours fed you during famine winters and your kin stood behind you in a dispute, has been clipped cleanly from the record. Your kin are the first problem. They don't shelter you now. Not because they don't want to, some of them probably do, but because sheltering an outlaw makes them liable at the next thing. The law has a very tidy way of expanding its reach. A cousin who hands you bread is now a cousin with a problem. The longhouse door stays shut. The fire inside it stays lit. You can see the smoke from the roof hole. The forest in winter doesn't have opinions about your legal status. The forest in winter is the world's most patient bureaucrat. It has nowhere to be, no superior to report to, and a rolling appointment schedule that's open until the snow melts. Temperatures in inland Norway drop to -15, -20. The wool cloak you're wearing, the one that isn't waterproof, the one your wife or thrall spent the better part of 2 winters spinning and weaving, is going to be soaked through by the second morning. Your turn shoes have wet feet within minutes. They had wet feet before you were declared utplag. This part hasn't changed. Some outlaws survived. The sagas make a point of this, because survival was interesting enough to record. A man named Gisli Surors lasted 13 years as an outlaw in Iceland. 13 winters. He moved constantly, slept in caves and under rock overhangs, survived on what he could hunt or steal from farms far enough away that the owners couldn't identify him. His wife Orther brought him food in secret for years, which was technically illegal, and the saga doesn't comment on this at all, which is its own kind of comment. Hunting works until it doesn't. Deer, hare, birds, if you're lucky. The forest produces protein in summer and almost nothing reliable in February. February has been doing its job in this part of the world since before the gods got their names, and February has never once been moved by a man's argument about whose grandfather started it. A lesser sentence existed, skogangur, forest-going, which was outlawry, limited to 3 years. You were still killable. You still couldn't be fed or sheltered. The distinction was that after 3 years, you could theoretically return if the original dispute was settled by compensation. The compensation was paid in hack silver, silver cut from arm rings and ingots, and weighed on a portable scale, which is basically Venmo, except the Venmo is fragments of someone's grandmother's jewellery, and you carry the scale yourself. If your kin negotiated on your behalf, and the other family accepted the weight, you came back. If they didn't, you stayed in the forest until the forest finished the argument. The sentence required no executioner. You walk out of the thing alive. You walk into the forest alive. You camp under a fir tree the first night. By the third night, the cloak that has not been waterproof since October has stopped pretending. By the fifth, the question of whose grandfather had been right at the original feast has begun to feel a little academic. By spring, if no one had killed you and the cold hadn't, you were already somewhere else. Some outlaws reached Iceland, which was itself largely populated by men who'd made poor decisions in Norway and needed significant geographic distance from the consequences. Iceland didn't ask too many questions. Iceland had its own thing by 930 CE and its own supply of new outlaws soon after. The continent of last resort ran out of room faster than anyone planned. You do the math, it is late February. The sky barrel is at a level that does not match the calendar. The flour sack has gone from waist high to ankle high. The stock fish is more bone than fish. The household keeps a tally, verbal, not written, of days remaining until the first edible greens appear, and the tally is currently saying more days than food. The tally is not announced. The tally is felt. The portions get a little smaller, quietly, each evening. The Norse called a bad winter hungersveta, famine winter. The word for starving is sveltra, which is the same word the English will later borrow and shorten into starve. You're not starving yet, but the word is in the room. Let's talk about the skyr barrel. It's not a barrel. By late February, it's a smell and a memory. Sky, stored since autumn in a wooden container that hasn't been properly opened since October, has been rationed down to the kind of quantity you scrape rather than scoop. The buttercrock has a film at the bottom. The whey, which you've been drinking because it's technically food, tastes like an apology. You've been eating like this since November, and it is not getting more interesting. The barley flatbread is mostly still available. Mostly. The grain was ground on a rotary quern, 2 stone discs, one on top of the other, turned by hand, and the flour contains enough grit from the grinding stone to wear your teeth flat by your mid-30s. A tooth ground down to a nub by 20 winters of flatbread is not a metaphor. It's in the archaeological record. Repeatedly. Your jaw aches in a way you've stopped noticing because there's no version of this winter where it doesn't. The stockfish is holding up better than everything else. Wind-dried cod, scray, strung up in the Lofoten air and left until it's basically wood, can last for years, which is its entire professional reputation. You soak it, you beat it with a mallet, you boil it until it becomes a thing that can be eaten rather than a thing that could be used for construction. It's not good. It is, however, present. In late February, present wins. Scurvy is a real possibility now. Not the dramatic Hollywood scurvy, teeth falling out, gums black, full collapse. The early version. The tiredness that doesn't resolve. The bruises that appear without explanation. The joints that ache in a new and specific way. You chew pine needles when you can find them, which is less a folk remedy and more a fairly accurate understanding of what your body needs. You eat raw fish when the stockfish comes out of the soaking water. You don't call it vitamin C. You call it what your grandmother told you to do, and your grandmother was right, and that's enough. Your sister's youngest is watched more carefully in February and March than at any other point in winter. Her name is Inga. She is 2. She is small for 2, not announced, just watched. 30 to 50% of Norse children won't reach their 5th birthday, and most of those will leave at the tail end of winter when the cold has been longest and the food thinnest and the body smallest. You know this without knowing you know it. Everybody does. Inga is watched the same way the food tally is watched, quietly, continuously, with nothing said. By day the light is coming back. Technically, 5 hours in December becomes 6, then 7. By late February you're getting something that resembles afternoon. The cattle are still penned at the far end of the longhouse, contributing warmth and ammonia in roughly equal measure, which is basically a living HVAC system if the HVAC system had opinions and needed to be mucked out every morning. The smell has long since stopped being something you notice and become something you simply are. The indoor work continues. Spinning, weaving, rope making. The distaff and spindle have been in someone's hands for so long, the motion is happening below the level of thought. A scald in the corner has been reciting the same sequence of kennings, Whale Road, Battle Dew, Raven Harvest, since the oil lamp was lit, which is basically a TED talk except the talk is in riddles, the riddles rhyme, and forgetting one gets you fired by a man with a sword. Nobody minds the repetition. The repetition is the point. It fills the hours. The hours are the problem. Spring is not here. Spring is a number of days away that you have agreed, collectively and without discussion, not to say out loud. You open the butter. The butter is in a wooden barrel, buried partly in the cool of the storage room, churned in autumn, salted hard, and packed down so the air cannot reach the lower layers. It is the household's calorie reserve. It is also the household's currency reserve. Butter at this density and salt level can be stored for years and traded for grain when grain runs short. You take a measured spoonful. You note the level. You write nothing down. The level is in your head. The barrel is roughly the size of a modern carry-on, except the carry-on costs your family about 4 months of dairy labour, and losing it to rot or theft is the kind of event people still talk about 2 generations later. You packed it in late autumn, when the cows were still producing and the salt was still available. It went in layers. Butter, salt, pressed down hard with your fist, because air is the enemy, and your fist is free. The barrel didn't complain about this process. It simply absorbed the information and held it. Butter like this turns up in Irish and Scottish bogs, centuries later, still technically edible. The bog butter community, and yes, archaeologists argue about bog butter with real passion, estimates some deposits are over 3,000 years old. Yours isn't going to make 3,000 years. You're going to eat it, or trade it, or watch it go rancid if the storage room gets too warm in early spring and you don't catch it in time. The barrel knows which outcome it prefers. The barrel is not rooting for you. The butter has a real production cost behind it. Each cow gives you roughly a litre of usable cream per day at peak production, and peak production is summer. By the time you've churned, salted, and packed enough to fill a half barrel, you've run a daily dairy operation for weeks, while also doing everything else a Norse farm requires in summer, which is everything. The butter is expensive in labour, the way a Michelin-starred tasting menu is expensive in money, which is to say the price is real, it compounds, and it's gone very quickly once winter starts. A full barrel of salted butter in late winter is basically a savings account, not a big savings account. The kind where you check the balance before every purchase and do mental math at 2 a.m. You trade butter for grain when your barley runs short. You trade butter for iron when a tool breaks. You trade butter for the goodwill of a neighbour whose goodwill you'll need again before spring. The Armling and Hacksilver economy handles the large transactions. Butter handles everything else. Butter is the Venmo of this household, except Venmo doesn't go rancid, and Venmo doesn't require 4 months of churning. The spoonful you just took goes onto flatbread that is harder than it was in October. The bread has been sitting in a dry corner since it was baked, which means it's approximately as yielding as compressed cardboard. The butter softens it slightly. Not enough, but enough. You press the lid back down on the barrel. You tamp the edges. You note the level again. The level is lower than it was this time last week, which means the rate of consumption is slightly above what you'd planned, which means you've been doing quiet arithmetic in the back of your mind since approximately November, and the arithmetic has not been improving. The barrel doesn't move. It just sits in its corner of the storage room, holding the remainder of autumn inside it, patient as anything, waiting to be empty. You memorize verse. The household storyteller is teaching the older children to recite skaldic poetry, which is built from kennings, compound metaphor phrases used in place of plain nouns. The sea is the Whale Road. Pive, Tux. The sea is the Whale Road. Blood is battle due. A sword is the wound flame. Each line follows strict meter. Each meter is older than anyone in the room. The verses must be recited, in order, without error, in front of an audience that will notice the error. Forgetting a line, in some courts, has cost employment. Forgetting a line, in some courts, has cost more. The skald is basically a TED Talk speaker, except the talk is in riddles, the riddles rhyme in 4 different interlocking meters simultaneously, and forgetting one gets you fired by a man with a sword. There's no scroll to reference. There's no manuscript propped against the chair. The poem lives entirely inside the skald's skull, which means the skull has to be maintained. Your nephew Eilí Frey tries to recite the phrase, Whale Road. He gets the stress wrong. The whole room hears it. The storyteller, your great-uncle Björntar, who has been carrying the poem since 974 CE, does not correct Eilif out loud. Throunder waits. Eilífr tries again. The stress lands this time. The meter does not soften for beginners. The meter also does not announce that it has noticed the improvement. Throunder odds once, almost imperceptibly. Eilífr sees it. Nobody else does. The oil lamp on the shelf is burning fish oil tonight. It smells like dinner. Not unpleasantly, just persistently. The light it throws reaches about as far as your forearm, which means the children are huddled close to the storyteller, memorizing by dim amber glow for the 4th or 5th hour of an 18-hour winter darkness. Outside there's nothing. Inside there's this. A stranger arrives at a feast. He sits at the bench nearest the door. The Jarl recites a line containing the phrase, "helmet tree." The stranger smiles at the right moment, which means he knows it means a warrior. He gets moved up 2 benches. The next stranger over does not smile, because he has never heard helmet tree before, and is unsure whether to laugh. He stays where he is. The Jarl does not explain. Nobody ever does. The older children are drilling a verse about a sea voyage. A real one, probably, somebody's grandfather's. And the kennings stack 6 deep before the main verb arrives. You follow the line. You lose it. You pick it back up. A girl near the fire has her eyes closed, moving her lips slightly, running it again from the beginning, because she dropped the 4th stanza and knows she dropped it, and is not going to let it show tomorrow. She won't. She hasn't yet. Meanwhile, at the far end of the hall, near the livestock partition, your grandmother Tordise is grinding grain for tomorrow's flatbread. The handmill doesn't stop just because there's a lesson happening. The grinding is a low, constant sound underneath everything, including the verse, including the lamp. A tooth-worn flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread belongs to Ohridis. Tholdes knows the old poems too. She learned them the same way Eilifer is learning them now, in the dark, by fire, with a great-uncle who didn't say much. The verse you memorize tonight will turn up at a funeral. It will turn up at a wedding. It will turn up at the thing when a law speaker needs a line that sounds older than whoever is arguing in front of him. It travels with you. It doesn't weigh anything. Unlike the butter barrel, unlike the hacksilver, unlike the turnshoes hanging wet near the fire, the poem costs nothing to carry. You go to the pit. The latrine is dug a short distance from the longhouse, lined with planks, covered with a wooden seat board, and emptied periodically into the manure pile, which becomes next year's fertilizer for the barley field. There is no flushing. There is no soap of the modern kind. There is straw to wipe with, or cloth, or sometimes moss. The pit is full of more than you can see. Roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm. Confirmed centuries later by archaeologists at Coppergate in York. You do not know any of those words yet. What you do know is that your stomach hurts. It's been hurting since October. Trainer. You've assumed it's the diet, the salted fish and sky, a barley flatbread with grit in it from the millstone, and you're not entirely wrong. But there's also a passenger, possibly several passengers. They've been travelling with you since before the snow came, and they don't plan to leave when the snow goes. Nobody's passengers do. At Coppergate, the soil under every latrine tells the same story. Nobody got out of the Viking Age clean. The walk to the pit in January is its own trial. You wrap the cloak tighter. The turnshoe leather soaks through on contact with the snow. The leather still smelled faintly of the cow it used to be, and now it smells like wet cow in a snowdrift. Fingertip dexterity departs somewhere between the longhouse door and the wooden seatboard. You make the return trip quickly. Speed is the entire strategy. Inside, the fire is going. The smell is ammonia and smoke and something fermented. Not bad. Not good. Just present, the way a very committed roommate is present. Bathing does happen. Regardless. Saturday is Lagerdagur in Old Norse, bathing day, which means an entire 7th of the week is a hygiene appointment named directly into the calendar, which is more institutional commitment to cleanliness than some modern wellness brands manage. The Bad Stoffer, the steam bathhouse, is a small turf structure outside the main hall, heated with rocks and water, functioning essentially as a sauna. You sit on a wooden bench. You sweat. Your neighbour Einar is also sweating 2 feet to your left. Einar has been sweating 2 feet to your left every Saturday for as long as either of you can remember. This is not remarkable. This is Saturday. The Bad Stoffer is basically a SoulCycle locker room, except the locker room is made of turf and contains every parasite currently living on the farm. The sweating is real, the cleansing is partial. The roundworm does not care about steam. Soap exists, a rough compound of rendered animal fat and wood ash lye, and it works on surface grime with reasonable conviction. It does not work on the things living inside you. You scrub. The lice on your scalp also have a Saturday. They survive yours. 1,000 years from now, archaeologists at Coppergate will sit in a coal trench and lift a layer of black sediment onto a tray. The sediment is the floor of a Norse latrine pit. Inside it are the preserved eggs of Trichuris trichurura and Ascaris lumbricoides, whipworm and roundworm. In nearly every sample, not some households, not the poor ones, every household. The Jarl, the Carl, the Thrall, the same passengers in the same proportions across the entire valley. The fertilizer goes on the barley field. The barley grows. The flatbread gets made. The tooth grinds it flat. A tooth ground flat by 20 winters of barley flatbread, and the grit from the millstone that ends up in every loaf, no matter how carefully you sieve. You eat the bread. You go back to the pit. The system holds. You head back inside before your fingers stop working entirely. The fire is doing what it can. The cattle shift at the far end of the hall. Someone is spinning. The oil lamp burns with the faint smell of fish. Nobody mentions the stomach. Your sister is in labour. The birth is happening in the women's section of the longhouse, behind a hanging cloth, with 3 older women present and 1 healer outside the cloth in case she is needed. There is hot water from the fire. There is a length of clean loth, which is clean by the standards of the household. There is no antiseptic. There is no anaesthesia. There is a high probability that the birth will go well. There is a non-trivial probability that it will not. The household waits. The 3 women behind the cloth have done this before. The oldest one, your great-aunt Thgertha, has attended perhaps 40 births, which means she's seen how the numbers run. Most go correctly, some do not. Thorgethard carries a small bundle of dried herbs, yarrow, angelica root, possibly some mugwort, that she can press against the mother's abdomen, make into a weak tea, or simply hold in her hands while she waits. The herbs have varying levels of actual utility. The bundle is wrapped in a square of linen, so old it has developed a kind of opinion about being unwrapped. Thorgethard's presence does more work than any of it. Winter makes this harder, not in any dramatic sense, just in the way everything in winter is slightly harder than it should be. The longhouse is cold beyond the fire's immediate radius. The cloth partition doesn't stop the draft. The water heating at the central fire has to compete with the ambient chill of a building that the cattle at the far end are working harder than the hearthstone to warm tonight. Your aunt died at 28, a hand on the shoulder of a midwife who had done everything she knew how to do. Your mother survived 4. The neighbour's wife survived 2 and was buried after the 3rd. The bones in the cemetery behind the church, that isn't a church yet, skew younger on the women's side than on the men's, which is the opposite of what the bones will say in any other century. Men die at sea, or in feuds. Women die in the room behind the hanging cloth. The healer outside the cloth is a lachnia, or close to one. She knows wound treatment, knows what grows locally that can slow bleeding, or bring on contractions, knows that a prolonged labour after a certain point has a trajectory that herbs can't change. She's essentially the medieval equivalent of a midwife with field surgery experience, which is basically a doula who's also read a WebMD article on emergency procedures, except the article is memorized oral tradition, and the emergency procedures involve very sharp iron. The child, if it survives birth, will face its own accounting. 30 to 50% of Norse children don't make it to their 5th birthday. The causes stack: cold, malnutrition in the famine months, waterborne illness from the same latrine deposits the bad stuff of soap can't fully reach, respiratory infections in a house where smoke is a permanent interior feature. A child born in midwinter starts with the deficit of the season already on its record. There's a naming ceremony to get through first. A newborn isn't formally named for several days, sometimes longer. A practical acknowledgement that the first hours are uncertain, and a name costs something socially to assign and then retract. The father decides on the name. The child is placed on the ground, briefly, and the father lifts it up. That gesture is the formal acceptance. If he doesn't lift it, the child is exposed. That's the word, exposed, left outside. The decision happens fast, and the winter doesn't wait. The fire settles. Someone shifts in the dark at the other end of the hall. One of the cows moves. The hanging cloth doesn't move. You don't move either. You just wait, which is the one skill winter has been very thorough about teaching you. You count the kindling. The wood store at the back of the longhouse, split logs, branches, twigs, dried dung blocks for the lean weeks, is lower than it was last week and lower than it should be for late February. The math on the kindling is the most important math the household does. Wood out faster than wood in means a colder fire, which means a colder hall, which means thinner blankets work harder, which means somebody, at the end of the cold, will not get up. You add another log. You note the pile. The pile knows. In Iceland, there's no pile. There's never been a pile, not really, because the island's timber is gone, burned through within a generation or two of the first settlers arriving in the 870s, cut for longhouses and boat repairs and fires exactly like this one, and now the hillsides are bare soil and wind. What's left for fuel is dried dung, peat blocks cut in summer, and whatever driftwood washes in from the North Atlantic. Your longhouse walls are turf. Your roof is turf. Your fuel is essentially compressed earth. You burn the island to stay warm inside the island. In Norway or Sweden, you have trees. This doesn't mean the problem goes away. It means the problem has a slightly longer fuse. The splitting itself is a winter job, which is a little like being told your cure is more of the illness. You go outside in January to split wood so you can stay warm in January. Your axe handle is cold enough to sting through wool wrappings. Your turn shoes are wet within 5 minutes. The single piece of untanned leather, absolutely committed to sharing every outdoor experience with your feet. You come back in with an armful of split birch and a pair of hands that won't fully close for another hour. The fire notices. The fire doesn't care. The fire itself is not a fireplace. It's a central hearth, a long stone-bordered pit on the dirt floor of the hall, low and open on all sides, no flue, no chimney, smoke rising to a hole in the roof that lets out maybe 60% of it on a good day. The rest stays. It pools under the thatch or turf, yellowing every surface it touches, soaking into the wool of every person who sits within 10 meters of it, coating the hanging meat and the stored rope and the children's hair with a fine permanent layer of grey. You don't notice it after a while. You only notice it when you step outside and breathe clean air and realize what your lungs have been accepting as normal. By this point in winter, the cattle at the far end of the hall are thinner than they were in October. You can count the ribs. Their feed ran lower than expected. It always does. And so now you're rationing hay the same way you're rationing the kindling and the dried fish and the skyr barrel that's been open since November and is running on optimism. The animals give body heat. You give them the last of the stored fodder. It's a negotiation. Nobody's satisfied. Your neighbour Ketil, 2 farms over, stopped splitting wood last week. Ketil's pile was finished. Ketil's farm went cold. You don't know this yet. You'll know it in spring, which is basically the Norse version of a wellness check. You walk over, and either Ketil opens the door, or he doesn't. The thing keeps records of who didn't make it. The thing keeps records of a great many things it cannot actually prevent. Every log you add now is a calculation about March. Not whether it'll come, but whether the fire will still be burning when it does, and whether everyone who went to sleep in November will be awake to see it. You set the axe back against the wall. You count the pile again. The number hasn't improved since you counted it the first time, which you already knew, and still you count it. So that's a Norse winter. The smoke in the rafters, the cow at the partition, the cod hung on a rack until it sounds like a plank. the turn shoe that has been wet since November, the scald with the whale road poem, the hacksilver in the pouch, and the ergot in the bread, the Saturday steam and the parasites that survive it, the kindling pile getting a little smaller every evening. These were farmers, most of them. Cold, tired, careful with their children for the first 5 years, fond of their cattle, exact about their grain. They were not monsters. They were people who had learned what the dark was for. You, meanwhile, are not in a longhouse. Your roof does not require you to share it with a goat. Your shoes are waterproof. Your December has electricity. Your vitamin C does not arrive through a pine needle. So, Shay, Sai. Your vitamin C does not arrive through a pine needle. Pull the blanket up. The fire is fine. The cow is somebody else's. The cod has been replaced by a sandwich. And the sandwich is in the morning. The skald has mercifully finished his poem. Sleep tight.